Okay, good evening, everybody. I think that's Chief Exec just joining us. I think we have everybody online that we're expecting, so I'll make a start. Obviously, this is the first time we've done a cabinet meeting virtually. So I'd ask people to be patient if there are any difficulties. And I will mute people if necessary, but please stay muted except for when you're asked to speak, because otherwise it will get a little bit difficult. So item 1 is apologies for absence, and I'm not aware of any amongst members. Perhaps I could explain for people watching that we have the 6 cabinet members here, a number of officers who are supporting, and a small number of councillors who are not members of cabinet but who have asked to ask a question or speak on a particular item, and we'll deal with that as we get to those items. Item 2 is to remind members to declare any interest they may have in items on the agenda as they arise. Item 3 is admission of the press and public. There is one item, item 10, which is a confidential item under section 104 of the Local Government Act. This is because it involves financial and business affairs. So at that point, the streaming on YouTube will be ended. Can I just ask cabinet members to indicate that they agree that this item should be confidential? Thank you, that's agreed. Item 4 is the minutes of the cabinet meeting held on the 16th of March. And again, I'd ask cabinet members to indicate if they have any concerns. In that case, can I ask if we're happy to agree those as a correct record? Again, ask people to indicate. Thank you. Before we go on to questions, I do want to say a bit about where we are and some of the issues about responding. Welcome people already, but just to repeat it, welcome people who are participating and who are watching to Calderdale Council's first virtual cabinet meeting. We're the first council in West Yorkshire to hold a cabinet meeting this way since COVID-19 took such a grip on our lives, and I'm pretty proud with the first one there. When we met on 16th of March, I said that we face the greatest challenge from this pandemic since the Second World War. What I didn't know at that point was that less than 6 weeks later, we would have seen over 20,000 deaths in hospital and many more in our community and social care settings. I'm not always keen on these analogies, but to put that into context, in the height of the Blitz in the Second World War, it took 7 months for 40,000 citizens to lose their lives. But every one of those losses is a complete and utter tragedy. There'll be a point in the future when the impact of the pandemic and the decisions taken will need to be looked at and assessed and understood, but that point is not today. Whilst we're seeing some modest reductions in those in hospital, suggesting that we are achieving a flattening of the curve of the impact, the pace of the reduction is likely to be much slower than the rise in infections that we saw in March and April. It's obvious that social distancing and staying at home has been having its impact, and the importance of those in battling this disease remains. At the last cabinet, we set out our 10-point plan in response to COVID-19, and I think we were one of the first councils to set out a fairly comprehensive approach, and others have picked up on that. I just want to pay tribute and say how proud I am of our staff for the work that they've done, but also, of course, the work of the wonderful NHS and many other partners, and especially both the voluntary sector and the individual volunteers and neighbours who have risen to the challenge of supporting those in need so well. Obviously, I'm not going to go again through the plan in detail. It's updated weekly and it's put onto our website. But some of the highlights that we do include, we've paid I think well over 3,700 business grants, about £42 million in money that's gone to local businesses. 115,000 items of PPE have gone to social care providers. We've supported nearly 2,000 people who've asked for help through our staff and volunteers, and we've recruited more than 800 volunteers to support that effort. I think it's right to say that local government has shown its value, its skill, its kindness, with a part of government understands our place and that delivers. It's good news that our Prime Minister has recovered from the impact of COVID and is back in charge, and I recently wrote to him wishing him well. I think we all want now to see some leadership and progress from the government on key areas. I've mentioned PPE before, but also starting to see some clarity about what the plans will look like for lifting lockdown, so we can all plan ahead as other countries have helped to do. Our community has been brilliant in responding, but I think the more that's clear about how we're going to move forward, the easier it will be for people. And looking ahead also, it's clear that a new future for public services is going to be required. We've started to think as a council about our work on recovery and how we're going to reset to what's not going to be simply going back to as we were, but to a new normal as we have to live with COVID-19 over the coming months, but also how we might change the way we live in the longer term. We want that conversation to include people across Calderdale, and we want people to have the chance to shape it and to tap into the spirit of talent, of enterprise, which core to our vision is what makes Calderdale such a special place. So let's look forward to starting that conversation soon. That's all I want to say in terms of introductions. I'll move on now to item 5 on the agenda, which is questions. We're obviously doing this slightly differently. So we asked first of all for members of the public to send questions in advance. I'm going to ask Ian Hughes, the Head of Democratic Services, to read out the 3 questions that we've had in turn, and we'll either respond immediately or provide a written answer. So Ian.
Thank you, Leader. The first question comes from Mr. John Saville of the St. Paul's Methodist Church, Tower Hill. And he poses the following question: if the new road system at Tower Hill Sowerby Bridge goes ahead and most of the parking is removed, then we might have to close most of our community activities that meet every night. I have already sent in many letters about this.
Thank you. Councillor Scullion, can I ask you to respond to that?
Thank you, and thank you to Mr. Saville for his question. This has indeed been a subject of much debate in the consultation phase of the Corridor Improvement Programme, and I will write to Mr. Saville at some length in response to this. Negotiations and discussions are ongoing in relation to this, and in particular with some land just adjacent to the church, which currently is owned by Together Housing. So we've had some issues in terms of the slowness of some of these negotiations because of COVID-19, but things are ongoing. But I will provide Mr. Saville with a very comprehensive response. Thank you.
Thank you. Just lost the last couple of words, but it was about providing a written response, so that's fine. Okay, Mr. Hughes, second question, please.
Thank you, Leader. This comes from Jenny Shepherd, who poses the first question: are you including the costs of community COVID-19 contact tracing and isolation in your estimates of the financial impact of COVID-19 on the council? There is some background information that was supplied with that question.
Thank you. And I think this will require mainly a written reply, but just in headlines, when the report to Cabinet was prepared on the finances, which we'll talk about later on the agenda, we didn't have details then of the proposals around contact tracing, and indeed they are just emerging. And our Director of Public Health and other officers are in early discussions about what the role of the council will be. So it's too soon to say what those are, but clearly we will want to make sure any costs to the council are identified and are included in our future submissions to the government. And second, Ian.
Thank you, Leader. The second question is again from Jenny Shepherd, and she asks, what are the current COVID-19 death figures for Calderdale including people who have died in care homes and at home?
Thank you. Again, this question did come in quite late, and I don't want to give a figure without checking it. As I think people will be aware, different figures for the sad number of fatalities are published at slightly different times. I do think it would now be helpful if we try to make sure that there is a weekly figure published. So we will provide a detailed response to this, but we'll also look at how we make sure there's a robust and reliable figure produced on at least a weekly basis. I think that was the 3 questions from the public. I now have, I think, 3 councillors who had questions, starting with Councillor Lee. So Councillor Lee, can I ask you to ask yours, please?
Providing me with the opportunity to ask a question at this groundbreaking first ever virtual Calderdale Cabinet meeting for the sake of our democratic processes in Calderdale. I hope the meeting proves successful. I have a question about council procedures and processes. It may be that some item or items considered at this Cabinet meeting will be called in for scrutiny. Can Councillor Swift please assure members that arrangements are well in hand to deal with important scrutiny issues by virtual scrutiny panel meetings within the usual timeframe which apply under normal non-coronavirus conditions?
Thank you, Councillor Lee, and I'm pleased to confirm that should there be a call in, we would certainly make sure it is possible to have a virtual scrutiny meeting. That I know there's been some informal scrutiny discussions taking place already, and want a bit more of a discussion with group leaders about how scrutiny as a regular process can get started. But in terms of a call in, which will be a 1-item agenda, I think today will provide a good model, and I think we'll find it quite simple to operate a virtual scrutiny on a similar basis. So should there be a call in, we'd make sure that happened. Thank you. Then got a question from Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Tim. So one of the more controversial aspects of the Coronavirus Act is the ability for local authorities to introduce easements to the Care Act 2014 and essentially ditch some of their social care responsibilities. I'm aware a few local authorities have now taken the decision to do that. Can you, as leader of the council, give some assurance that we will only do that in Calderdale as an absolute measure of last resort, and we'll do all we can to try and maintain our social care duties despite the difficulties we face?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Baker. I mean, it certainly would be a measure of very last resort. I think, Councillor Metcalfe, Bob, I think you've got a bit more of context about where we are in terms of social care, which might be useful.
Yes, on this certainly. And thanks to Councillor Baker for his question. And perhaps we send a fuller response, but I'll outline various answers to the points of the question. I think it starts by saying by supporting and consistently tracking the health of the adult social care workforce and deploying staff where they are required, adult social care as a whole continues to have the capacity and remains sufficiently robust in terms of skills and expertise to undertake the designated statutory roles required of adult social care services. This continues to be Care Act assessments where it's deemed appropriate to address risk and meet need, including safeguarding, mental health and capacity assessments as required. And all statutory function are now undertaken within the principles and guidance of proportionality, safety and meeting need as set out in the easement guidance. And we've also been able to, the workforce have been able to support new priorities presented by the COVID crisis, principally key developments such as the social care hub and the fast track hospital discharge arrangements. To date, activity across the Directorate suggests that there is no current requirement to enact an easement of the Care Act. A framework is being developed to record and evidence actions to date and going forward, based on priority to ensure the most urgent and acute needs continue to be met. If at any point the information collected by the framework reflects an inability for the Directorate to discharge any of its statutory functions owing to pressures from the COVID crisis, a recommendation of last resort will be made by the Director of Adult Social Services. And this will be based on clear evidence for given areas of activity to be eased for a time limited period, risk assessed, closely monitored and regularly reviewed. And I can follow this reply up with slightly fuller version.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. And the final question from member is Councillor Bellinger.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Hope you're all well, and obviously a quick well done to all our staff for all the hard work that they're actually putting in at the moment through these troublesome times. I have a little bit of background behind my question first. Obviously, due to people being in isolation, one of the parts of isolation is to ensure that people's mental health is a priority. So what people have actually been doing is obviously a lot of work around the house and the garden, which has resulted in more waste to be disposed. Unfortunately, because our recycling centres are closed, people's accumulating this waste outside, and it's resulted in fly tipping or burning of rubbish, and again vermin in some places depending on the type of rubbish that's actually been disposed outside. I have made contact with other authorities. Wigan have actually opened their recycling centres. Greater Manchester Combined Authority, there's 9 of them which are looking to open their recycling centres. I've done a poll over the weekend and 4,409 people are for Calderdale Council opening theirs against 359 people against keeping them closed. What I'd like to ask is if Cabinet have considered opening our recycling centres, working on obviously a safe and robust system. If not, why not? And if yes, when? That's it. Thank you.
Have we lost the chair?
I think we have temporarily. Councillor
Well,
Scullion, was that a question that you were
Scullion
going to give a response to?
I was going to suggest, given that Tim's feed seems to have frozen for the moment in a very thoughtful pose, I was going to suggest that Councillor Press came in on that one.
It's obviously been very difficult for people during this period. I want to say, first of all, that I'm really pleased with the way Suez have dealt with an extremely difficult situation and the way that general refuse and waste has been collected. And I think they're to be applauded for that. But obviously, we've had discussions about the issue regarding this, and we've been taking advice from the government too, taking your point about other local authorities. We've also been talking to other local authorities in West Yorkshire, and what we're looking at at the moment is phasing in the gradual reopening of our waste and recycling centres, and obviously that's something that will have to done carefully and strategically, so that we can help people get rid of the items that they've accrued, but also not doing it in such a way as would cause additional problems. So yeah, it is something we're looking at doing. We're still focusing on it exactly when, but it's something that would be happening in the very near future. But you know, yeah, in terms in terms of where we're going to start with garden waste, and then move on to working with sewers on the issue of the waste and recycling centres and introducing that on a part-time basis. We can't just open them all at once, but we've got to really just take it, just take it as it goes, really, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Susan.
But it's definite. I suppose I should add that it is definite. So you caught me because I was expecting the leader to respond. But it's definitely top of our agenda, and it's something we're going to be addressing and have indeed been discussing this afternoon with the Chief Exec and with the appropriate senior officers.
Paul, would you like to, Councillor Bellinger, would you like to come back quickly on that?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Press. Thank you, Councillor Scullion. Yeah, no, I fully understand that. It is actually doable in Calderdale. We have 7 recycling centres. We have 7 postcodes. There's potential to open, you know, Monday for HX1, Tuesday for HX2, Wednesday for HX3, doing it that way so people are not actually piling into the recycling centres at once. There's also the option that if HX6 and 7, which is Solby and Hebden, they could potentially close for parts of the week while the other recycling centres are open. So yeah, I agree. There's ways of phasing this in that ensures that, I suppose, we've got the correct amount of staff to be able to run these centres and everybody's not piling into these centres all in one go. So yeah, I agree. Thank you very much for looking into that. It'll be a great weight lifted off many people's minds. Thank you.
Chair, could I, Councillor Scullion, could I just, as Chief Executive, raise an item of information on this? Clearly, it's an issue that's very important to residents. We are clear in unprecedented circumstances. There is an issue fundamentally that no council in Yorkshire or Humber has reopened their waste centres. That to open them in isolation from everyone else would clearly cause some issues. And those that have, which are a very small number, have done well, but have had to manage queues over an hour long in the first few days. So we do need to manage it carefully. We do need to think of the traffic management implications, but more fundamentally, the government advice is really clear: stay at home, protect the NHS, and save lives. And that drives everything that officers and I think all councillors want to put first. And the prioritisation of that over everything else, when a visit to the waste centre is not, at this moment, a reason that's accepted as a reason to leave your home. But having said that, we are expecting a letter from the Minister later this week, which may give further information and may offer us some assistance in dealing with this issue. So I would urge that there is an understanding, which I do think the public understand, that we are still at the peak, close to the peak of this epidemic, and we are still seeing people losing their lives on a daily basis. And clearly that's guiding all the decision making of the council.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Chief Executive, and thank you, Councillor Bellinger, for raising that. It has been an issue for all of us, and it's a particular issue when people who don't respect the community actually do fly tipping. And let me be very clear with people: we will pursue people who fly tip. We will find them, and we will find them. There is no excuse for making a muck of your own borough, really. So, you know, we're asking people to be patient. We are looking into all of these things. We're looking at things in a phased way, but there is still no excuse for tipping. So thank you for raising the issue. Mr. Hughes, do you have another question from councillors?
I do, Councillor. It was from Councillor Lee. Sorry, he's already answered that question, hasn't he? No, we've had Councillor Lee, Councillor Bellinger and Councillor Baker. Those are the only questions at this stage. There are 2 more questions, but I think it's more appropriate that those are dealt with at the time of the item. That's Councillor Blagborough and Councillor Mrs. Carter. If they can indicate that they're in agreement with that. Councillor Blagborough, I can see, is nodding. Councillor Mrs. Carter and Councillor Mrs. Carter is nodding. Yes. So those are all the questions, Councillor.
Thank you. I think that Councillor Swift has probably dialed out and is attempting to dial in again with some assistance. So with your permission, Cabinet, I'll carry on working through the agenda until he reappears. The next item is item 6, Council Tax Reduction Scheme. And I think Councillor Press, that's you.
Yep. Okay. Yes, it is. Yes. This is actually good news at a time when we're all so used to bad news every day. It's good news for the people in the borough who are among our most vulnerable. We received £2.17 million from central government in order to be able to help people in receipt of working tax credit and indeed people who only pay the council the 19% of their council tax. Just to put this in some context about how hard some of our residents are being hit. In the first few weeks of the pandemic, we received an extra 106 applications for council tax reduction. So this is money that was actually desperately needed to see people through hard times. But of course, getting under the rules of the complicated rules for welfare benefits, in normal circumstances, if you receive extra money, then your amount of council tax you pay would go up. So what we're asking Cabinet to agree tonight is that because we're doing everything we can to support local residents and to minimise the impact of the pandemic, we're asking Cabinet, I'm asking Cabinet to help the 1,121 households which are going to receive the weekly increase in working tax credit, which is £20 a week. That would normally have meant that the council tax reduction would actually have been reduced. They'd have had to pay more. I'm sorry if this sounds complicated, but it is. So basically, to ensure that those that receiving the weekly £20 are not worse off, we're asking Cabinet members to approve a temporary change to the local council tax reduction scheme. This will prevent any reduction in a household's current award of council tax reduction resulting from the increase in working tax credit. And this will apply for 1 year ending on March the 31st, 2021. There's no financial implication for the council because, as I've said, the money is actually coming from central government. So we're not actually increasing the amount of council tax reduction. We're simply stopping the money that people receive being reduced because of the extra money. Hope that makes sense. I just wanted to flag up, I'll flag that up in a minute. We're asking this to be approved because we're in an unprecedented situation. We're very grateful to the government for giving us this extra money. And these are exceptionally challenging times for everyone. And I'm pretty sure that Cabinet will be minded to approve what's being proposed this evening. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Press. I'll just finish this item and then I will hand you back to the Leader of the Council. Comments from any Cabinet members, first of all. Want to indicate if you want to make a comment?
Sorry, I wasn't.
Councillor Press, you wish to come back?
Sorry, what I wasn't clear about is that the funding that we've had will reduce council tax paid by all working age households who are currently receiving the reduction by £150, and that will be automatically reduced and future payments will be recalculated. So it is quite complex, but yeah, it's all in hand.
Thank you. That's actually a useful clarification because it does make it clear that people do not have to apply for this separately, which, given the pressure the staff are processing financial issues are under at the moment, that's a very good thing. If there are no comments from Cabinet members, I just wanted to say that this is actually a very welcome piece of news, because one of the things that the COVID-19 crisis has made us realise is actually how pressed some people are, how people's financial resilience isn't what it might be, and we need to think going forward about how we actually tackle that and what the role of us as a council is. In the meantime, can I see an indication from members in terms of the recommendations set out at item 3 on report number 6, please? Can you indicate if you support the recommendations? Thank you very much. Over to you, Councillor.
Thank you. I don't know what happened then. I've had to swap to my iPad. I see some smiles. Can people hear me? Yes, okay. I'm not sure I'm going to find controlling this from the iPad quite as easy, so fingers crossed. So item 7 is the financial update. People will hopefully have had an opportunity to look at the report, which sets out an early forecast of what the potential costs of the virus will be to the council. The report identifies a number of areas of additional costs, which at this early stage include the additional cost to adult social care. That's from both the pressure early on to transfer quite a number of people out of hospital into the community, but then also increased costs for social care providers. Secondly, some additional costs around maintaining sufficient childcare provision and the housing of vulnerable adults. But then there's also significant loss of income. So this loss of income from services which have had to be closed, such as particularly the sports centres and parking. But then also what we're starting to see and start to anticipate is what the likely loss of council tax and business rates income will be as we start to see the economic impact work through. Clearly, we're at a very early stage. We don't know what the full impact will be. And most importantly, we don't know how long it will be before the lockdown is either lifted or relaxed and how that will work on. But the very early crude estimates based on the current trends is that the overall cost could be of the order of £36 million over the financial year. We had an initial sum of money from the council of 1.6 billion announced nationally, and Calderdale's share of that was 6.1 million. About just over a week ago, there was an announcement of a further 1.6 billion pounds, and you might assume that that means we will get another 6 million pounds. However, it's quite clear that after lobbying by district councils and county councils, and I do understand particularly the district's point of view on this, the government are looking at the formula. So at this point, we don't know for certain. I suspect the amount we get will probably be less, but we don't have that confirmed. But even if it's at the 6th, then clearly we're potentially looking at a substantial gap. And obviously we'll keep lobbying with the LGA for the government to fully fund the impact. But we also need to think about what the shape of the council finances is likely to be going forward if post the virus there is a significant reduction in our income from a variety of sources, but particularly council tax and business rates, and how far government will be willing to pick that one up. The report says that further updates will be provided, and for the next cabinet meeting we'll have more of an action plan about how we intend to manage this situation. The report also includes an update on some of the support that's being provided through the council to local residents and businesses. Susan, Councillor Press, on the previous item talked about some of the issues around council tax support and the help that's been given there. And I talked in the introduction about the support for business grants, a great deal of which has been distributed. But of course, if there are businesses who have not yet applied, then we would still encourage them to do so. So I'll pause at that point. I mean, this report is largely for information at this point and to note the intention to bring forward more of an action plan next time. Councillor Scully and Jane, is there anything you want to add?
I just wanted to add a couple of things. One is about the importance of local, in that the central government is channeling a great deal of the support for businesses and for individuals through the local structure the local authority, that actually it's very hard for central government to do these things without a local authority that knows its area, knows its people, knows its businesses and so on. So the importance of local, I think, shouldn't be underestimated. I think the other thing is that we are asked as Cabinet tonight to simply to note that report. But I think we should also just pause for a moment in terms of the seriousness of it. If you think about any business or indeed your household income, if the income you've got coming in reduces very substantially, and as you, Leader, said earlier, the new normal will look different, and we don't know whether some of those sources of income that we have as a council will actually be available to us in the future. So we are having to reshape our financial plans. We hope we don't get to the situation of issuing a Section 114 report. There's a new one that we've all had to learn, not just Northamptonshire, presumably in the future. And we hope that, well, more than hope, you know, we plead, we argue, we shout to central government saying, actually, you cannot afford to let local government fail. And we need to keep lobbying our local MPs and much more widely through local government structures like the Local Government Association about the importance of making sure that we've got a financial security to serve local people.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Baker, you asked to speak on this item, so I'll bring you in next, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, clearly local government is at the front line of dealing with a response to this pandemic alongside our partners in the NHS and emergency services. And the spending that we're having to incur now is absolutely essential in order that we can protect and do what's right for the people in Calderdale. But it is a totally unprecedented situation in terms of the increase in the government's deficit. They're already missing the deficit target before going into this crisis, and now we've seen like multi-billion pound amounts of borrowing. And I think it's startling actually how small the 1.6 billion given to local government is in contrast to some of the sums of money that have been put out by the Chancellor for other sectors of the economy. So what I wanted to say really was that my group is fully behind any calls for the government to provide that essential funding for local government to continue to provide those frontline services that people absolutely need at the moment. I'm also aware that you might have to make some quite drastic decisions if that funding isn't forthcoming. And some of those decisions would not, you know, due to the nature of the situation we find ourselves in, will not be subject to the same degree of democratic participation and oversight that you would like them to be. So I'd be interested to hear really if you've got any ideas or plans as to how we can try and involve people as much as possible if we do have to make any really tough, difficult decisions over the next coming months.
Thank you, James. That's certainly something we want to look at and think about the best way of doing that, both in terms of members, but also in terms of wider dialogue with the public as well about understanding the reasons for the pressures that we're in. I touched on in replying to Councillor Lee's question at the start that we hope to get to a position where scrutiny could meet, but that may not be the only or the most appropriate mechanism here. So that's something we'll take away and certainly come back on. Can I check Cabinet members? Are there any other comments to raise on that? Jane, is there anything you want to add to what I've just said?
Yes, there is. Thank you to Councillor Baker for that support. I think the support will come from many quarters in terms of local government across the board. And certainly I know that lobbying has been done in other circles. But Councillor Baker also raises another point. There are going to be, one way or the other, there are going to be some very, very difficult decisions that we're going to have to make the rest of this year in terms of some of the plans that we have made in the medium-term financial strategy and other places. We are going to have to work very hard week by week in terms of keeping on top of the financial challenges that we've got. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's helpful to have that update at this point, and we will bring the action plans to a future meeting. So can I ask Cabinet members are happy to agree the recommendation and note that? Can I see all agreed, please? Thank you very much. That's agreed. I'll move us on now to item 8. This is one of the items we have on the agenda, which is not COVID related, but needs progressing. And this is the West Yorkshire Plus Transport Fund, some issues around the corridor improvement programmes. And Councillor Scully and Jane, can I ask you to introduce this, please?
Thank you.
No,
You're
sorry.
muted.
I think that Councillor Swift and myself reached for the mute and unmute button at the same time. The report is a very straightforward one in the sense that, sorry, let me get my papers properly in front of me. In terms of, this is an issue that you as Cabinet members have seen several times, and I must emphasise that the money for this, because we have just been discussing finances, the money for this programme comes from the West Yorkshire Combined Authority and comes ultimately from the government, and it's a programme that is happening throughout West Yorkshire. On the first page, it talks about the purpose of the report in relation to acquiring land to enable the next stage of that corridor improvement programme to go ahead. The corridor improvement programme, you will recollect, mainly affects the A58 coming in, going through Storby Bridge, turning up Jewel Lane, and then going back along the A646 towards Tomerton. And the purpose of the report before you today is basically asking for permission to acquire by compulsory purchase order where it's necessary to acquire a number of slivers or edges of land in particular in order to achieve the improvements that we want to make. There is really quite a substantial, we proposed, you said as a result of the consultation, we did programme in relation to the corridor improvement programme. I think we put it up on our own website tonight, and I think it's also on the West Yorkshire Combined Authority website, and there's a lot of material in there. There are several things to say about the CPO. One is, as I've said in previous circumstances, CPO is a strong power. We're very clear in terms of being very transparent about when we're going to use it as a council. The other thing to say is that, as some of you have already picked up, some of the pieces of land that are in this proposal already belong to the council. We put those in partly for transparency, as I said before, partly for tidiness, and partly whether there are going to be any side road orders that may have to change as a result of land being acquired or the programme itself, but we're not really expecting anything very much in relation to that. If you look over onto item 7, you'll see the recommendations. But before I go on to the recommendations, I just want you to pause in relation to particular issues. And I know that Councillor Carter in particular has got a question. I've also referred earlier to the question about the diversion for Jewel Lane that is proposed in the corridor improvement programme. And I'll be responding to Mr. Saville in relation to that, of trying to accommodate the needs of not residents in this case, but people who want to attend a church, particularly in the evening, for activities there, and the way in which we're trying to accommodate that desire. I also wanted, before coming back to the recommendations, to talk to you about Hebden Bridge. And if you go onto the we proposed, you said, we have changed parts on the website, you'll see that there are a number of things that we have changed. I'm just going to find my relevant briefing in relation to this. which I'm clearly not going to find. Apologies for that. I've got lots of things here for Councillor Carter, but I can't find the relevant one. I wanted to say something about Hebden Bridge in particular, because there is some concern about the removal of parking spaces that are currently on Burnley Road. Let me deal with that first. The removal of the cars which currently are parked on unregulated, for parking purposes, part of Burnley Road between Hebden Bridge and Mythen Ride. And I grant that it is extremely well used. There are two things which are proposed for Hebden Bridge which should help alleviate issues of parking. The first, of course, is the extension to the station car parking. And the second is the proposal, as yet some way off, for a car park in the old adult education centre just near Stubbing Home. The reason for removing the car parking in Burnley Road there's several reasons. The first is that actually buses and large vehicles, wagons, cannot pass each other while the cars are parked. So that's one of the reasons, and that delays traffic coming in and out of Hebden Bridge, as well as potentially being dangerous. The second is that we intend to increase the footway there in order to provide better cycle provision there. And also, and it's something that's been brought up with me time and time again, to allow people in mobility scooters to make that run between Hebden Bridge and Mythen Ride and vice versa. At the moment, many cars park half on the pavement and people are stranded if you can't get a bus which allows your motorised wheelchair to get on. You are really very stuck. So the proposal is to remove that parking, unregulated parking on the road, Burnley Road, but not until alternative car parking of the same numbers is provided. So I hope that goes some way to assuage the concerns that people have in relation to the car parking there. The other Hebden Bridge issue, which I know has been of concern, is the removal of the small amount of car parking in Market Street in the centre of Hebden Bridge, again on the A646 Burnley Road. That will be removed, and it is a problem, particularly for buses, but it does really delay traffic. And that's not just because I want private cars to go more quickly. It's a key contributor to air quality of cars idling there. However, loading bays will be provided for the, again, refer to the previous part of the programme about trying to enhance circulation to stop idling and to improve air quality in Hebden Bridge. In terms of Ripponton, there are a number of issues relating to Ripponton, and I shall leave it for Councillor Carter to ask a question in a moment. I wanted to just make it very clear that actually this is a programme which is about reducing journey time. Of course, we'd all like to see that when we sit on buses for a very long time. But just as importantly, journey time is important for the economy as much as anything else. But just as importantly, it's about taking cars off the road where we possibly can, trying to encourage people to make what the specialists call modal shift and choose another form of transport. But also it is about improving air quality. The more cars are jammed up on that A646 and indeed the A58 in Sorby Bridge particularly, the poorer the air quality becomes. So I commend this to members, and you will see there are 4 recommendations. The first is the acquisition of land specified in Appendix A, and you'll see there's a set of maps and drawings. Is approved, and any associated interest in those bits of land. That the council approves the purchase of the land specified through negotiation where possible. As I said, we do try and always acquire things by negotiation and not to use our compulsory purchase order powers. 3.3, the recommendation is about the delegation, that delegated authority be given to the interim director of regeneration strategy and the head of legal and democratic services in consultation with myself as the holder for regeneration resources to make any CPO submissions to the Secretary of State which are necessary to deliver the corridor improvement programme. And the final recommendation is that members approve the making of side road orders as necessary. I'll stop there, Chair, and take any.
Thank you. I've got, just in terms of cabinet members, I've got Councillor Wilkinson wants to ask a question, and then I'll bring Councillor Carter in. So Councillor Wilkinson, please.
Yeah, it's not so much a question as just a couple of comments really in relation to bits of the scheme that relate to Sorby Bridge. The first one being the Blackwall Lane bit that's been omitted in the friendly area, and I just wanted to say that it was good to see that residents' concerns were listened to on that really, and that was dropped. And I think it just, it goes to show that when we do consult on these things, that we do actually listen to the public and what residents have to say, and it's not just a sort of rubber stamping exercise because we have to consult. And then the second one I was just going to comment briefly on was the Tower Hill bit, which the Deputy Leader has already alluded to, and we had the question from the church earlier. From my understanding, if we were to drop that part of the scheme of the SIP, we really would lose a hell of a lot of the benefits of the corridor improvement programme for Sorby Bridge in terms of traffic flow and congestion and air quality. So it is something that we're having to go ahead with. However, I do fully understand the concerns of the church and the many community groups and users of it. And therefore, I think it is important that we do look to resolve that parking issue. And I know there are a couple of potential solutions to that, one of which the Deputy Leader did allude to earlier in the meeting. And I know that myself and the other ward councillors are keen to work with officers and the Deputy Leader and the church to make sure that we get a resolution to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carter, you asked to speak on this item. Sorry, Councillor Carter, we need to try and you need to unmute. That's better.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I assume Councillor Scullion has actually seen the question that I put in, but I will read it out for everybody else's benefit. And I would like to ask Cabinet to reconsider and please remove the proposal included in Appendix A. It says to purchase land on the question, so I'm not really sure whether we need to purchase the land, whether we need to reassign the land, and just what quantity of land, because it mentions the library, Ripondon Library. The drawing is not very clear. It shows the red line of the Ripondon Library, but then there's just this green bit. So I'm not really clear exactly how much land is going to be used, and I'm not sure just under whose ownership it is. And that is to install an HGV turning facility at Brig Road. This area is currently used as a bus lay-by and also includes a hackney carriage rank facility. And to start to add HGVs into this area could compromise pedestrian safety. Adjacent to the lay-by on the A58, there is a pedestrian crossing to the doctor's surgery and Ripondon J&I School. The use of this area as a turning facility will involve HGVs travelling both directions along the A58 from the junction with the A672, causing more emissions. Additionally, the only access into Brig Road Estate, so I understand or I'm led to believe, will not be where it currently is now, but on the far side of the estate, which is a steep, narrow road. It is not sufficiently wide enough all the way up for two vehicles to pass. And that we're going onto an estate road and what I believe to be an unadopted road under private ownership of what was Pennine House in 2000. This proposal is to improve the transport corridor to Leeds, and there also appears to be a view that the A58 and the A672 in Ripondon are the diversionary route for the M62, in particular eastbound from junction 21. This is not correct. The designated diversionary route is through Shaw and Denshaw. We've been fighting this little battle for a long time because they persist in not, Highways England persist in not ensuring that the diversionary route is properly signposted to take things through Shaw and Denshaw. And there's one thing that this community, this very diverse community of Ryburn Ward, is absolutely 100% behind, and that is not encouraging more HGVs onto these roads because of the nature of the moorland roads in particular, and the narrowness, and in particular in the centre of the village, which is very narrow. The report states in paragraph 4.2 that these proposals fits with the ambition to make Calderdale the best borough and address climate change. Well, I'm really sorry, but I cannot believe that these proposals are enabling easier HGV access and looking after the best interests of residents in Ripponden and indeed the rest of my walk to the Sober Bridge boundary at Watson Mill Lane. It's the last thing we want, is no traffic along this road and an ease of traffic. We aren't gaining anything from these proposals in my ward. All we are gaining is an inconvenience and actually something that would be very difficult when you're looking at big 44 tonners trying to do a turn in the centre of this village where there is a doctor's surgery, a library and a school. Okay, I understand the consultation when I say there's not sufficient consultation. We were invited to a meeting which I know I couldn't attend. I was doing something else, and there was never a facility to go again. And I've never sent any documentation which would have been useful if we could have had a briefing paper sent to councillors as a consultation, exactly saying what the proposals were. But it will have a profound adverse effect on the lives of residents of Ripponden. And so we would really like you to remove this proposal and refer back to the issue for proper consultation, consideration and debate.
Thank you. Councillor Scullion, can I come back to you on that one?
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Carter. One of the first things to say is that we have just heard this afternoon that Highways England is going to withdraw the westbound diversion route through Ripponden later this year. So that is good news at least. However, I'm afraid the eastbound routes will remain. And the scheme that we've got in front of us today is actually designed for the eastbound routes. Let me just go into some detail, but I will, with the officer's help, write to you in more detail in terms of the particular schemes. But let me start by saying, as I understand the drawings have red lines around the council ownership in the usual way. It's the green slivers that we're talking about in terms of where there might be side roads orders or way leaves or whatever. But let me read the answer when I sought advice on this. It is an issue which you have raised several times before, and I know that the parish council had the opportunity to look at it as well. I understand that was a meeting set up, and I think there were personal reasons why yourself and I think Councillor Holden were on that particular occasion unable to meet. But let's see where we get to with this answer. The land, as I said before in the earlier introduction, is already in the council's ownership and is included in the schedule just for to facilitate removal of any way leaves or easements that happen to be on that piece of land. The proposals for an HGV turning facility in Ripponden have been put forward to address occasional issues created when the M62 motorway shut. Now, they're rather more frequent than occasional, I'm afraid, at times when we have a bad winter. But the main benefit of putting that in is to enable HGVs that have arrived in Ripponden as a result of closure to avoid attempting a turn from the A672 onto the A58 and vice versa, and blocking the main signalised junction, which, as you've said, is a very difficult junction anyway. It's not envisaged that it will generate any additional HGV movements through Ripponden. So I wanted to reassure you on that. With reference to access into the Briggroyd estate, our records show that both Briggroyd and Upper Briggroyd are adopted over the affected lengths. So I don't quite understand that point there, but I will, given this is detailed and I can see everybody else glazing over, but this is an important issue, I will write to you, Will, in response to your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Just clarify, Councillor Scullion, I mean, clearly the recommendation gives some flexibility for detailed amendments, changes to be sorted out between yourself and the officers under delegated powers, but we do need to make progress on the schemes as a whole. Is that a fair summary? Thank you. You will follow that up with more detail with Councillor Carter. I'm sure the other ward councillors would want to see that as well. Can I ask if there are any more comments from cabinet members on this? I'm slightly struggling because I can't see you all on the screen. In that case, and noting the concerns and Councillor Scullion's offer to follow up on the detail with Councillor Carter, can I ask if we're happy to agree those recommendations? Okay, thank you. I'll move on to item 9. You have to slightly bear with me because I'm not quite on the system I expected to be. So but I think I have them poured in front of me. Item 9 is a bit of a catch-all report, which is partly a summary of decisions that have been taken under the whilst we're effectively operating under urgency and priority powers, and then also includes some proposals about delegations going forwards. So it sets out some of the issues about the response to the lockdown and the changes that had to be made to services in 4.1, and then captures a few specifics that were agreed. So 4.2, the decision to go ahead with the next stage on the future towns funding, a specific proposal around delegated powers to enable us to work together with West Yorkshire Joint Services on enforcement issues around businesses who are avoiding the COVID regulations. Then in 4.4, it's formally to agree us accepting the money which we already have for disbursement to businesses under the small business grants. 4.5 deals with some suggestions regarding the empty premium charge, where we're allowing officers to exercise some discretion where it's clear that the property is only falling into the surcharge level for empty homes because of the virus interrupting plans for that property to be occupied. There's then a quite lengthy section. I know Councillor Blackburn wants to raise a point on this regarding planning, where clearly the volume of planning applications is rather less at the present time, but there are still issues going through the system that needs approval. And this sets out a way of enhancing delegation, but still giving both ward councillors and the members of the planning committee an opportunity to comment on that. We might want to say a bit more about that when we hear from Councillor Blackburn. There's also a very specific item about brief extended opening hours for Calder Valley skip hire. So I think that's an important and useful report that captures some of the various decisions. And just check whether aware of any cabinet members who want to comment on this. Obviously have been briefed on this as it's gone along. So I'll ask Councillor Blackburn, you wanted to comment on this item. You need to unmute yourself first, of course.
Excellent, thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you and congratulate you and your team for conducting the business as normal in these uncertain times. Equally, congratulations to all the staff in Calder. They're doing an absolutely amazing job. So the question, I guess, in some ways relates to the limited delegated authority. I was concerned about the size of the development. So whilst I can appreciate there needs to be delegated powers for simple applications, I'm equally concerned actually as ward councillors if it's a larger development that has a bigger impact on the community that we may not have the opportunity to, first of all, either conduct a public meeting if necessary to make people aware. So it's really the main question. I think you've got the written lengthy question, but I'll make it very, very simple. So is there to be a limit on the delegated authority in terms of the size of the development? I think that's in simple terms.
Okay, thank you. I understand the concerns. I think to say we clearly want to work around that and be realistic. I'm not sure. I'll ask Councillor Scullion to comment on whether a specific limit is the best way at this point. Jane,
okay, thanks, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Blackburn, and it's a very good question. And we've given it some thought in the officers, so that advised me further. And the question of size of development, I think, is not the only one to be taken into consideration, because I think we can all think about small developments which have got a profound effect on a particular community that we as ward members would be furious about and want to support the objectives. So size alone can't be a determining issue. I think that's quite difficult. And I should also say, by the way of prefacing, the answer is that the Royal Town Planning Institute and the professional bodies are actually taking a very close look at this. I think it is already possible to have an online meeting, but there's a great deal to be thought about in terms of what we might do to make that really work, particularly in terms of equal access. There are often people who do not have access to IT. There are a number of complex planning documents to be displayed, of course, to the committee and to those attending. There are the speeches by the members of the public and their agents indeed. So there's quite a lot to be thought through. We're not quite there yet, shall we say, but watch this space. But let me just say a little bit about the delegation. You'll know already that a high percentage of applications are already delegated to officers. And that's been the case for some decades now. In addition, there are other safeguards, and the first is that the right of a councillor to call in an application within their ward does not change. It's unaffected by these interim measures. So called in applications would have to wait and be determined in the normal way. Whether the new normal is online or in person, we don't know yet. The second thing is that where there's no calling, planning committees will be consulted before the decision is taken. In terms of particular applications that would have normally gone to committee. And in terms of, shall we say, applications that are strategically important, clearly committee members will have to be consulted. But we also need to be conscious of delay. We've all had members of the public contacting us, desperate to get a particular project going. So we need to balance, there's a series of kind of trade-offs, as it were, between a reasonable speed in these difficult times and making sure that there is a proper process. Now, I was just going to say, the final thing I wanted to say really was, it is the Royal Town Planning Institute I was referring to earlier. I think our planning officers wear their membership of the Royal Town Planning Institute very proudly, and clearly there are set professional standards. And I'm sure that none of our planning officers, I think there's a particularly good set at the moment, will seek to abuse these delegated powers in these difficult times. So I wanted to give you some reassurances that there are checks and balances, professionalism of officers, the reassurance that Colin can still go ahead, and that we are thinking about the future in terms of how we might, in these difficult circumstances, hold meetings in the future. I was also asked about planning applications, and planning applications are of course down a bit on last year. What is also down a bit, of course, is building control, because it's been difficult, not impossible, but has been difficult for our building control inspectors to go on site. But again, we're watching the situation week by week. I hope that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Banjo, you haven't previously indicated what to speak on this item. I see you indicated, so I'll allow you briefly to come in on this.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a brief point. With being Deputy Chair on planning, there's also the site visits from members to take into consideration as well. These actually do help determine the decision made on planning applications as well. So that's another thing that would be extremely hard to do at this time.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good point. And gather Councillor Holden also wanted to comment.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just a very quick one, really, regarding planning and enforcement. There are some people, especially in our ward, who are seeing this period of time as being a free-for-all with regards to pretty much doing what they want to do, and with the view that there's not going to be any enforcement. Can I have assurances that our enforcement teams are still working and are still operational?
Thanks. I mean, certainly I know from ward experience that they are, but Jane, do you want to say a bit more on that?
Yes, a question I asked myself actually, because of concern about particular, this is separate from building control, of course, but planning enforcement, our planning enforcement officers can still go out. Clearly they have to be careful about their own safety and social distance and travelling in cars together and so on. But yes, they are still in operation.
Okay, so thank you for everybody on that, and please be assured we will keep a careful eye on these delegations. Obviously, we would like to see planning committee functioning as open a way as possible, but I think, as we all recognise, there are some particular challenges about that committee, and probably a little bit more work needed on how we can do that. So with those comments, can I come back to Cabinet members and say, are we happy to agree that report? Thank you very much. That brings us to an end of the public part of the meeting. So I'll just take this opportunity to thank people for bearing with us. I'm sorry about my unplanned disappearance and reappearance in a slightly different form. We'll get there. And I just need to wait now before we go into the final item, confidential. I just need to wait for officers to confirm that they've turned off the feed to YouTube. So I'm going to ask Kirsty or Mark to sort that for us.